You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining me this morning. In 2022, Vermont adopted the Advanced Clean Cars mandate, but now the state's governor, Phil Scott, a Republican, has put a pause on those plans. To get the perspective of the dealers in the state, we are now joined by Matt Cota, who's the managing director of the Vermont Vehicle and Automotive Distributors Association, also known as VADA. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us on the show today. Talk to us about this. What kind of feedback have you heard from the auto dealers and your members across the state?
Well, thanks, Jim. And you're right. Vermont was one of a dozen states that adopted the California regulation requiring that 35% of model year 2026 vehicles be delivered to Vermont as electric, battery electric, zero emission. And we're not even close to making that mandate. When it became part of a rule here in Vermont in 2022, there was cautious optimism. Vermont's auto dealers like selling electric vehicles. They're good at it. And there's a bevy of incentives available then to be able to do that. And we've seen increasing of 2% every year of battery electric vehicles. But we're at about 12%. And that includes hybrid electric vehicles, which not all count toward the ZEV mandate. So it became clear that we were no way going to meet the 35% number by the end of 2026. So because of that, and because of the awful repercussions for local auto dealers here in Vermont and their employees and their local communities, I think Governor Scott did the prudent thing, recognized we weren't going to meet that mark, and called a pause for that.
Sure. Was he the governor in 2022 when this went into effect?
Yes, our governor has been there for 10 years now, and he was under pressure from something called the Global Warming Solutions Act. So that's a law passed in 2020 that requires Vermont, doesn't just create goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but puts legally binding mandates to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors.
Wow.
And on the climate action plan that Vermont has adopted, this was the number one solution to the biggest greenhouse gas emitting problem, which is transportation. So the governor, recognizing that this was a tool in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with those legally binding mandates, his agency, Natural Resources, promulgated these rules and put them in place and hope for the best. Hope for that we'd still have the incentives in order to encourage Vermonters to adopt electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure. But even with very generous incentives, both state and federal, and from the local utilities, to convince people to buy electric vehicles and to install chargers, we haven't met the mark. So it became obvious to those of us who interact with the customers every day, knowing what they can and can't buy, that we needed to push pause.
Sure. There are many senators and congressmen in D.C. that feel as though these incentives need to go away. Why are we subsidizing those people that wish to drive an electric vehicle, even though it saves will help save our environment and what have you? That nope, it shouldn't. One system shouldn't be have an advantage over an ICE vehicle, say, with a rebate or what have you from the state or the federal government. What's your take on that? Is that something that should stay in place there in Vermont for the state incentives?
Well, here's what we do know. Both the federal and the state incentives and some of the utility incentives absolutely bring traffic into the dealership, help encourage Vermonters to make the switch. But what's almost as important is what they continue to do after they make that decision. A lot of dealers, especially in a small state like Vermont, where we only sell about 40,000 new cars every year in the entire state. We're a very small state. But you have connections with the customers between the dealers that last for generations, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. So they want to give good advice because they want to keep that customers for the long haul. And what they're finding is that when they have customers that buy an electric vehicle, which have access to a service panel that can accommodate a level 2 charger, that have access to parking outside their house, a 10 by 20 spot, either in the garage or outside every day, have a job in which they can park their car and charge it while they work inside. For those individuals, they don't go back to gas. They stay with electric cars. However, that is a small minority of the people here in Vermont. Remember, here in Vermont, we have more dirt roads than paved roads. The most popular car is not a car, it's a truck. So the reality is that there weren't the types of vehicles at the price point that the customers demand. And without subsidy, it becomes really difficult to understand how we are going to even get above 15%, never mind the 35%, which is called for in the California rule.
And I think a number of states are going to be following suit on this because you're sharing the same problem with so many other states that just don't see this as a reality. I mean, it's crazy to think that we would see that across the country, a 35%, penetration on EVs, right?
That's it. We will absolutely grow our EV market share from 8% to 10% to 12% to 15% in the near term.
Right.
But even getting to a third within the next 5 years will be increasingly difficult. And then you back out federal tax credits, you back out state incentives, you back out money that's available for electric charging infrastructure.
Sure.
You recognize that not everyone has access to level 3 or level 2 chargers here in Vermont, that we don't have the infrastructure necessary, or people don't have not the lifestyle, but the life where they can actually park their car while they work or park their car while they sleep next to their house.
Right.
That's a challenge for a lot of people living in rural parts of the United States, and especially here in Vermont.
That's right. And also, I might add, in the wintertime, you've got some pretty strong winters there in Vermont. That affects the life of the battery, right?
Absolutely. So we're seeing that. And remember, Vermont also adopted the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which was in many cases even more problematic. So the largest industry in Vermont, agricultural part of our economy, is dairy haulers. And dairy haulers will sometimes move thousands of gallons of milk 440 miles a day, round trip.
Right.
Bring it, and they don't take any days off, 365 days a year.
Wow.
So the idea that they would be hauling milk in December in an electric truck, which has cost twice as much and has a third of the range with no level 3 charging infrastructure available, it just became impossible. So we were actually at a point of not only pushing our Vermonters from buying their vehicles outside of the state where they have more choice with combustion engines, but really harming our agricultural economy and forestry economy that depends on diesel trucks, which were being limited in terms of when they could be sold here in Vermont because of the California rule. That's also on pause. Wow. We got 18 months to figure it out. If there isn't the vehicles at the price point that the consumers can afford and the vehicles that they want to buy, then we're going to have to reevaluate in 18 months. But for now, at least we have a pause. Yeah,
no question. Are you hearing from the citizens of Vermont? Are they, because they're very concerned about their environment there in Vermont, for sure. It's a beautiful state, without a doubt. What's their take on this? Because I know probably many of them are feeling as though, wait a minute, we wanted that to be the case, right?
Yeah, certainly. We have conducted, the Vermont Auto Dealers Association has conducted an education campaign, and we have worked with partners. There were 15 different trade associations representing hundreds of businesses, representing thousands of Vermonters, who signed a petition, signed a letter to the governor saying it's time to press pause, not to abandon the idea that we are going to further electrify our transportation sector. No one's saying that. It's that the pace in which it is done is simply untenable, and it could cause real harm to our economy. So in general, most people recognize that these are important goals, that they are that we approve of going in that direction, but not at the speed at which the regulation requires, because the impact that it would have if we adhered to the California Clean Car and Clean Truck Rule would have been devastating for our local economy, especially our local dealers.
Sure. You mentioned infrastructure a number of times. Do you feel as though that really is the big hindrance there in terms of getting more people behind the wheel of an EV?
Yeah, certainly. And on the truck side, think about where our dairy farms are. If you've ever visited Vermont, you see that bucolic field and that 100-year-old red barn and the cattle in the field.
Sure.
I mean, these are in areas where we don't have access to level 3 power, where we don't have old barns we don't have service panels that still have knob and wire tuning. To be able to think that these farmers who are scratching out a living are somehow going to be able to afford a $400,000 electric truck rather than the $200,000 diesel truck that has a third of the range and can't even get to where they need to go to bring the milk. I mean, it became obvious that this is too far, too fast. On the car side, yes, there are true believers, EV evangelists that will never go back to gas. And they have a lifestyle. They have a house that can accommodate the charging network. Maybe they have a job in which they can charge while they work. And that's wonderful. And that will continue to climb. But remember, that's a minority of the consumers in Vermont. So the idea that, everyone just needs to know that they're going to save by plugging in rather than gassing up. Well, for many cases, that is absolutely true. But for the vast majority of cases, it is not. And it won't be until we have a more robust charging network, until we build out our electrical system to accommodate all these electric chargers and the vehicles that Vermonters want, largely SUVs and trucks, are available at a price point that they can afford.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure you've heard from a number of your counterparts in other states, and I'm sure they're congratulating you, as many, many states are going through this exact same situation, and I'm sure they're talking to their governors and their legislators to change this as well, because it's crazy. I mean, to talk about 35% EV environment in such a short amount of time is just unrealistic. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, while I've got you here, how is business in your state this month? How's it going? I know that we came off of a pretty good quarter, but has that continued into May?
We had a great April in comparison to the first quarter of the year.
Yeah,
I think a lot of it has been driven by decisions to make to purchase vehicles, unsure of when the tariffs kick in. I know we've had a number of dealers that have used that as an opportunity to say we have pre-tariff vehicles that are available. It's unclear where things are going to be this summer. I don't think anyone has a crystal ball, but in terms of driving Vermonters to the dealerships to see about buying perhaps maybe earlier than they wanted to, but getting in now, it's been very successful. Where we are going to be in July, that's difficult to say.
Yeah, for sure. Nobody, that's the $64,000 question, right? Nobody really knows for sure on this tariff situation. It's just day by day, whatever comes out of the White House. So Matt Cota, the managing director of the Vermont Vehicle and Automotive Distributors Association, thank you so much for joining us here on CBT News. I know our dealer viewers will get a lot out of your visit today, and a lot of people are watching what you guys are doing in Vermont. So thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.